Oh yeah, we're actually going to start doing class.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Corey Williams and I work at the Fayetteville Public Library, and welcome to Exploring Southern Food, a discussion. Today we have our panelists. One of them is Kat Robinson. She is a food historian and writer. She's actually Arkansas's food historian and most enthusiastic road warrior. She's a Little Rock-based travel writer and is the host of the Emmy-nominated documentary Make Room for Pie, a delicious slice of the natural state. She's also a committee member for the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame and has written many comprehensive travel guides for those who love food in Arkansas. Also, we have with us Chef Erin Rowe. She is a Northwest Arkansan-born chef and author and has traveled the world experiencing different diverse cultures, which she loves to create on the plate. She is a graduate of the Maui Culinary Academy, and even though she has an international background, she still views herself as a Northwest Arkansas as her home. She's an expert on regional cuisine, and her book, An Ozark Culinary History, documents Ozark foodways. And also we have with us Amanda Stone. She is a food columnist for the Joplin Globe and the head writer for Joplin Magazine. And she is also the director of the Globe's newspaper and education program and facilitates writing contests, journalism workshops, and regional spelling bees. And Heather Artripe will be our moderator for this panel and also discussion person. She serves as the outreach coordinator at Ozark Natural Foods. She's been there for about 11 years and has been teaching classes at the co-op for the past 6. So welcome with us today. If you have questions while we're discussing, you can type them in the chat box, and Heather Robideau and I will be asking those periodically through the discussion. But for now, I'm going to hand things over to Heather Artripe, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you all for joining us this morning. It is the perfect morning to be inside with coffee or tea, curled up and talking about one of my absolute favorite things, food, Southern food, and food writing. So first thing we want to do here is I'm going to hand it over to our panelists, and I want y'all to tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then what drew you into the profession of food writing. Who wants to go first?
Okay, well, I'll go. So my name's Erin Rowe, and I didn't expect to get into food writing. I thought someday that I might write a book, like probably in my 70s, and I ended up doing it about halfway through in my 30s instead. But I went away to culinary school in Maui just to for my own edification. I was after college, and I always wanted to go back to school for something. I could never find like a field that I really, really loved enough to get like a master's or a doctorate in. And I fell in love with the food world working out in Maui the first time, and decided that if I ever went back to school, I would go to culinary school there. And from there, I started doing food writing for a local magazine called Maui no Ka'oi and doing like food reviews. And I found that I really liked it. And ultimately, you know, coming back to Northwest Arkansas, I was in a position where I felt like I didn't see our foodways being documented on a holistic level. And I was approached by a publisher who wanted me to carry a book in the shop I was running. And I said, you know, it might not be a bad idea if you actually had a food about our culinary history in Northwest Arkansas. Now that book would sell, and I would buy that book for the gift shop if you would have that one. Do you have that book? And she said, well, no, and I started detailing to her, well, if you did have that book, this is who you should interview. This is how you should write it. This is how you should structure the chapters. And in like 10 minutes of talking to her, I'd structured out the whole book in my head and then offered to write it for her. And she took me up on it, signed a contract, and began the process.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was kind of a really weird way to go about things. I think God opened the door for the opportunity. I didn't write a book first and then find a publisher. It was the other way around.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Kat, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, I was a television producer. I worked for THB in Little Rock and KAIT up in Jonesboro. And in 2007, I left to sort of fulfill a lifelong dream of writing for a living. And I discovered very quickly that the pieces that I would put out, the ones that were popular, were about restaurants. And I thought, you know, if I write about food, I'll never starve because there'll always be food around. And that's been a little bit too ample for me. But over the years, I've been the I fell into writing for the Arkansas Times with its Eat Arkansas blog for several years, and that led to Serious Eats and Forbes Travel Guide and USA Today. I wrote a lot for other people. Strangely enough, I have a similar experience to Erin. I was approached by a publisher who was out on the internet and just searching the words Arkansas food, and sent a message to me that I thought was a joke. I almost didn't return the message, and it was you know a lot about Arkansas food. Can you write a book? I'm like, sure. And I came up with these 4 proposals, and I turned them in, and I was. He came back and said, which one can you write in 30 days? And that's how my first book, Arkansas Pie, A Delicious Slice of the Natural State, was born. I did 3 books with History Press, and then I spent several years sort of trying to figure out what it was I was going to do. Make Room for Pie came along. I got to do a documentary with Larry Foley, and I found out right before Pledge Drive, where we were going to introduce the film on Arkansas PBS, that the book had been taken out of print. So I very quickly, in 10 weeks, put together a 322 word page book called Another Slice of Arkansas Pie. It's a long title, and started publishing for myself and other authors. Today, I do television, I do the books. I don't do as many articles anymore just because there's so much going on. But like many people during the pandemic, I had to switch focus because restaurants were closed. And so the past year I've been writing cookbooks, and now I'm back out there working on restaurant books again, culinary tour guides for the state. So I didn't intend to be a food writer, but I fell into it, and it's sort of become a brand.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. All right, Amanda, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Amanda Stone. I've been writing a food column for the Joplin Globe for about 9 years. It's a weekly column. And I got started with that because I was working in a nursery with the editor of the newspaper, just like a little side gig for fun, you know, plants, not babies. And we just had a really nice connection, and she asked me if I could write. And I said, yeah, I think I can. and that's how it began, because we would bring food. We would all, the people that worked there would bring food, and it became like a Saturday tradition where we would sit around and share food and swap stories about the food and where it came from. And so that's how I began writing my food column. And then when I had a child, it really became more, I wanted to know more about where the food was coming from. And so my column was focused on clean eating for a long time, and still is. Yeah, I like to write about food, I like to eat food, I like to cook food, and I like to grow food. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. I love all those things as well myself. All right. So next thing here, what do you find special about Southern food in particular? All right. We just want to go the same way. Erin, you want to start out? All right.
I think that like Southern food, at least when I was like researching Southern food and even Ozark food, and it's more like fine-tuned little space. I feel like Southern food is unique in that in the South, we didn't always grow up with a lot of money. And so I feel like poverty, and also just kind of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, kind of having to make do with whatever you had, forced a lot of folks to just work with what was already pre-existing around. And that, for me, at least in the Ozarks, when I was doing my research, was a lot of wild game. And so I feel like that's something that's really unique about Southern food, is the utilization of underutilized meats, wild game, fish, those kind of things. Whatever, you know, flies, walks, and swims, you know, it ends up on the Ozark plate and often the Southern plate.
Yeah, I know. I learned from my granny that nothing gets wasted. So for sure. All right, Kat.
We're very fortunate in the South because we have a longer growing season. we have it in our genes and in the way that we put things together. Again, nothing goes to waste. So canning was very popular pretty much as soon as we had jars that had tops on them, we were putting up stuff in there. Before that, we did a lot of drying of our food, so we had them throughout the year. But you can get fresh produce in the South naturally grown pretty much from the beginning of April until the first really hard frost, and you still have some vegetables there. The garden really is where we shine. I know that there's people outside of the South that think that everything is with gravy or deep on here, and that's really not the case. You have so much available, from tomatoes and cantaloupes and apples and all sorts of beans and potatoes and what have you. You can even have an existence that's totally vegan down here in the South. It's not hard because we have this very broad breadth of things that come from our gardens and our fields. And of course, you know, the wild game. I grew up during the winter months. Venison was a very big part of my family diet when I was growing up. Squirrel, even once or twice raccoon. I'm not a big fan of raccoon, but you get it in dumplings. You can put it in dumplings. It's great. And of course, we have fishing year round here in the South. So there's always some sort of protein we can get to the table that is economical, that just takes a little rolling up your sleeves and getting to work.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
I think that there's such a rich oral tradition with how our cooking, the Southern cooking, is passed down. That's what I think is something really special about it. It's a lot. There's not maybe a written recipe, but we all know it takes a pinch of salt, and you use your hands like this, you make a ball like this, and there's a lot of the oral tradition of how we cook and how we learn.
Oh yeah,
Agreed.
that's for sure. All right. So leading into our next question here, what food or meal do you consider quintessentially Southern? There's a whole bunch to choose from, so
Of course.
yummy ones.
Well, don't be upset, ladies, if I get to speak first, but I've got to claim Southern cornbread. I just can't help it, leaving the sugar out and doing it in an iron skillet, getting a nice crust on it from that oil that you put in the skillet and warm it up in the 450 before you pull it out and dump in the batter. That's one of my favorite smells of the South. And I think that translates well for Arkansas food, but probably other places in the South. I mean, every family has their own version of cornbread. I mean, there's been books written just about it alone and the way it goes with all the Southern food. But I definitely use yellow cornmeal. I use self-rising flour. Everybody's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I don't make it in a glass pan, and I don't put a lot of sugar in it, and it will be dry. And it needs to be kind of a dry cornbread. If it's wet, it's Northern cornbread, and I don't want it. So, unless I'm in the North, of course.
We agree a lot there on the cornbread. I do mine pretty much the same way. So that's awesome.
Oh yeah. I like to put a little sorghum and salt in my butter and mix it up together. And then I spread it over the top, Heather.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm going to try that. That sounds awesome.
I learned that from McClure. He always has that sorghum butter at the Hive. And
yeah.
At a 21C Art Hotel. And I was like, I think that's what he's using. I'm going to use a little bit of that myself.
Awesome. I might have to go home and make cornbread after this. That sounds good for today. All right, Kat, what about you?
I was going to say, Matt and I actually graduated from the same high school, like 7 years apart, and he has been an incredible influence on New Arkansas cuisine. So I always love name dropping him. He was actually named the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame Proprietor of the Year this year. So I'm just thrilled to talk about it. But I have to show pictures. My picture here, and it's the catfish feast. Catfish. Okay, we know Mississippi claims that it's the catfish capital, but here in Arkansas, we celebrate it with a feast that is singular. We use different setups. We call them a setup or fixings that we put alongside it. So your catfish almost always comes with, you can get brown beans, you get coleslaw, you get the green tomato pickle or green tomato relish, which is very particular here to Arkansas. I mean, people outside the state don't do this. Of course, Hush Puppies, which is just in many ways, it's a different type of cornbread. And I love sharing this because it's really what we grew up on. We would go out in the morning and we would cast out deep, or we'd run trot lines. That was really popular in my family, is run a trot line. You get a catfish feast, and of course, a couple of hours. By the end of the day, you have fresh fish. You have Hush Puppies left over from it. You may have potatoes in some form. Our family usually was pan-fried potatoes. You had something that could rival famous world feast out there, and it's right to your table, and it's homegrown. I think it's very Arkansas, a very, very Arkansas type of meal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Agreed.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm getting hungry now, Kat.
Me too.
I've done my job.
I'm glad we're doing this right before lunch, so it's perfect timing. All right, Amanda, what would you like to add to our possible lunch that we're going to make today when we get done here?
This was a tough one. Hush Puppies was definitely way up there on my list. So yeah. But I think I'd have to really say biscuits and gravy for sure. Or at least, or separately, gravy, biscuits, like they're both just so Southern, and they're also things we don't need a recipe for. You know, you just kind of put them together, you know. I have to say also, a lot of these things, I just finished up this year of doing food columns on the states. It's called the Tasty States. And so what I learned about it is that, you know, these state boundaries they're imaginary. So like, Kat, when you're talking about the catfish in Mississippi, and yeah, it's Southern. It's not, you know, we all share all these foods, but you know, we try to lay claim to them as a state, but man, it's the boundaries they're imaginary. So yeah, the food goes right over those boundaries, and we all share it. So.
Sure. I remember the first time I made gravy by myself several years ago, after I moved out, and I called my mom, and I was just in a panic that I was going to mess it up, and she's like, "You're fine, just do it." And it was fine. It turned out great. But that was one of the moments I was like, here's my chance to see if I can really do it or not. So that's also one of my very favorites. Oh, that all sounds so good. All right. So it feels like you can't talk about Southern food without considering the historical and cultural influences on its creation. What do you consider the largest cultural influence on Southern food?
Well, I sort of mentioned it earlier, but I feel like just being poor. And I know, and I don't mean to degrade the South in any way. I think we've done a phenomenal job of making great food out of whatever we have on hand, but we just haven't always been. I mean, even if you look at the Civil War, those men didn't have they didn't have uniforms. They just put it together and pieced it together. And we've kind of done the same thing with the food around. I feel like people have had to just kind of make do, but luckily the southern part of the United States has been plentiful in supplying like wild game and fish, and also just the fruits of the forest, you know, berries, nuts, all the things. So I feel like our biggest influence has just been necessity, really. We've learned to live with less and try to make the most of what we had. And I think, I mean, Kat can probably speak to this more than I can, but when I think about pie, for example, I think about stretching whatever you garden, and, you know, pie crust, there's not much to it. You know, you might have used like lard from the pigs, you know, that you had, and just using those basic ingredients to make something delicious. So I think we're really ingenious in the sense of that. And, you know, when I think about like the culinary world as a chef, I think about the French and how they created wonderful food that's some of the best in the world. And they were some of the poorest folks as well. And they were using all the different parts that most people would discard from the animals. And they would make those organ meats and things into something wonderful. I mean, that's how we have foie gras. But like originally, you know, they were things that nobody else would eat. And so I just feel like the Arkansans, we've taken things like possum, squirrel, whatever, but also just things that, you know, most people would discard and made those into delicious foods. So that's my take on it, I guess. I
feel we're a crossroads, and we have our entire cuisine was built out of what our immigrants brought to table. We have immigrants from all over the place, both by choice and not by choice. I mean, so many of our Southern innovations have to be credited to slaves that were brought to America. And these were our cooks. These were our servants here. And I say our as in the South at the time. The Black community is the reason that we have a lot of what we have, especially things like fried chicken, which is something that really was developed in Africa and brought here. You got origins that date back to medieval Scotland, sure, but that's only back to the 16th century. Whenever you talk about breading something and frying it in the pan and getting it ready to go, putting some gravy with it, well, that really does come right out of Africa. Here in Arkansas, we have a lot of other influences, particularly Italian influences, but Lebanese and German and French. It came across in layers, one after another. It started with the Native Americans that were here that had the wild game, that utilized gourd and pecans and what was here. And then you had our first explorers that came through from France and from Spain, and it just developed. So we are layered. We're like a lasagna of cuisine right here. You can't really pin it on any one or 10 or 20 cultures. I mean, it's just as important the Chinese influence that we had that came in the early 20th century, and the Asian influence, particularly Indian influence, that's coming in right now. And of course, it's just, we have so many different cultures to thank for it. We in the South are the true melting pot.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Totally agree on that for sure.
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot else to say about those. You guys kind of took my answers, but I would just say the specifics, though, the African foodways, the okra, black-eyed peas, green peas.
Yeah,
We have succotash, we have gumbo. Those are my answers as well.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Oh, for sure, definitely. Alrighty. So, considering the South is experiencing a new migration of people, how do you see these new cultures and traditions changing Southern food?
You see, even when you go to the farmers markets, I mean, before COVID, I think we're going to go back to being normal again, which I'm looking forward to. You see a lot of folks selling vegetables. It's a lot of the Hmong people, at least in Northwest Arkansas. We have a lot of Marshallese people as well. I'm seeing a lot of sort of Asian influence in the cuisine that's changing it, which I'm excited about. I mean, I love being able to find fresh bok choy, and like different ingredients being grown that actually do fine in our climate. We just have never grown them, and like Kat said, we do have a large Italian population. It is a melting pot. There are so many people moving here from India to work for Walmart and vendors. That's really affecting the cuisine, at least in Northwest Arkansas. So you're seeing a lot more great Indian restaurants popping up. So I'm seeing a reintroduction of spice and stronger almost heat to some of our food, which is nice. So if there's a bridge or a hybrid version of Southern food that's being made by folks, and we've also got a lot of folks here from South America, Mexico, Central America. There's kind of a mixing of some of our foods where things get a little spicier. So I like that. And I'm just excited to go to other restaurants that aren't just Ozark cuisine. So I really enjoy, I run a food tour business. That's the main thing I do now these days. And so I do walking food tours of our downtown areas, and I call it Ozark Culinary Tours. But people, when they are on the tour, they always ask me, well, are we going to just have biscuits and gravy and fried chicken? I'm like, no, we're going to go to what is now the new Ozark. And the new Ozark restaurants are not all biscuits and gravy. Now, we might go by the Hive and try some of the Matt McClure's modern takes on Ozark and Southern cuisine. But then we might also swing by Yayo's Taqueria and have some authentic Mexican tacos or enchiladas, things like that. So that's part of our culture too. And I want to celebrate that, which is why on a food tour with me, you'll always go to a lot of different types of restaurants.
That all sounds so good. And I know personally, like in my family, like the older generation basically just use salt and pepper. So, introducing all these new spices, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Has been so fun. So I love that. I love that. All right, Kat.
I think the influence that we're going to see from the Marshallese is going to be pretty significant in Northwest Arkansas. I mean, I know a lot of people aren't aware, but because of the Marshall Islands and their very small amount above sea level that the entire country is, it's terrible, but they have found themselves a place here in Northwest Arkansas, particularly in the Springdale area. And with all these families who have come in, they've been bringing their recipes, they're starting their restaurants, they have their own dinners out there. I think there's going to be a huge groundswell of this Pacific Islander cuisine. In Little Rock, we've already started to see this, but we're starting to acknowledge that we have the states of Mexico represented through our Southwest Arkansas area, Southwest Little Rock. There's a lot of fear, unfortunately, in the traditional communities that have been here a long time. But for those that have been willing to step over those boundaries, it is a wonderful. There's 13 Mexico represented in Southwest Little Rock at this time. And because many of those restaurants started out or have a component of food truck, while many other elements of the restaurant business have faltered during the pandemic, they have absolutely thrived. You're seeing it really move into particularly the Jalisco's region type cuisine into some of our mid-range and upper range cuisine. So it's a completely different sort of food revolution in Little Rock, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see.
I love that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I think there's a real desire too I think that's what people want, I think people want something different. They want to know about foods from other places because they're making relationships with these people. They're not from Arkansas. And that means wanting to learn about them and wanting to learn about their food. And I think a lot of it comes from the farmers markets. Like people are growing those foods and then we have to get them from the people that are growing them while it's still small and local, and then maybe it'll get bigger. Hopefully it does. Yeah, I think that's relationships a lot of the time.
Definitely, for sure. Alrighty. Do you feel like the farm to table or the back to landers movement is influencing Southern food?
I do in a way. I don't see the back to landers movement as much in Northwest Arkansas because I'm kind of more in Bentonville, Bella Vista, but you do see a lot more people trying to go back to eating healthy and growing their own foods because of preservatives, pesticides, they're maybe even with COVID, not wanting to go into a grocery store. So people have a lot more time these days. It seems like if they're working from home to do some of those home projects. And I definitely think I've seen an increase in gardening and just home gardens, things like that. People, even if it's not a back to landers movement, it's like a small microcosm of that, like in their own, like with just little families, they're trying to have their own beehives and they're producing, a lot of their own vegetables from their little backyard. I think there's a big movement towards that because people want to be healthier again. And there's that perception that growing your own food will allow for that. And I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for that. Heather, I know you're with Ozark Natural Foods and I'm really grateful at least for grocery stores like that too, that also kind of aid towards that organic, all natural thing as well. So thank you for that. For those
definitely.
That don't have time to garden or don't have a single green thumb anywhere on our hands. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. I live in an apartment, so I can grow things in containers, but not a whole bunch. So I agree there. And yeah, we definitely saw, we still can't get canning supplies in the store because so many people were growing gardens and canning last year and everything. And that's wonderful. I'm so excited to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Kat, what about you?
Well, farmers markets, 15 years ago, we had roadside stands, what have you, but there has been a definite interest, and strangely enough, it comes partially from the tourism industry and partially from agriculture to bring people to the farmers markets. Back in 2007, 2008, of course, we had Little Rock. We had the Certified Arkansas Farmers Market that popped up in North Little Rock. Most of our farmers markets were not really incorporated. They did not have adequate shelter. Now they are a tourist destination. Bentonville's farmers market is now famous, as is Fayetteville's. Little Rock, of course, has expanded its river market offering. But every little community now around here now has a pavilion or has a station or something to help support farmers and bring them together. We also see private enterprise farmers markets that are popping up, particularly Mia McGee Market and Urbana Farmstead in Little Rock proper, or I should say Pulaski County. McGee is in North Little Rock. And these private enterprises are working directly with farmers to help float all the boats, as it were, to bring everybody up at one time. Something really amazing happened, though, this last summer, because people were scared to, well, scared is probably not the word, trying to be, and they were not trying to go into enclosed spaces like food markets. Farmers markets were really suddenly very popular. In fact, SL sweet corn, which has a following because it's a remarkable strain that's been grown by the same family for the past 80 years. You couldn't order a bag for a while there because as soon as it went to market, it was gone, unless you were willing to get up and drive to Dumas. People really got back into their farmers markets big time. And now there's been some curiosity about who's raising your meat and who's growing your tomatoes. That's been amplified. And we see a lot of farm to table now that's changing. For instance, we have Dogwood Hills Guest Farm, where you can actually go up and milk the cow and meet the cow and then have buttermilk and stuff made from that buttermilk in the same premises. Or you can go to Mound City outside of West Memphis and stay with one of their cottages, and they grow a garden on their grits farm, but the garden that is particularly vegetables that people who stay there can actually use in their kitchens. So people who have traditionally been the restaurant set, who maybe the box meal set, are suddenly very interested and they want to know more about their food. So it's booming right now, and I only see it getting bigger this year.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I do too.
Great.
Yep, I agree. And I think farmers markets they are it. You're right. They're tourist destinations. When I go somewhere, I want to go to the farmers market. That's what I want to do. And then they're also, it's not just about food, it's about the community coming together. It's got live music, there's flowers, there's art. You're probably doing good food though. So it is, food is kind of bringing us together just like it always does. Just like how we always end up in the kitchen or the farmers market, we're going there for the food, but there's so much more there going on, and it's bringing the community together. And I think that's what it's all about.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and just seeing how other people fix things, that they might buy at the farmer's market, like, how they prepare it and stuff. I love hearing about that too. So I love the farmer's markets. I'm ready for them. All righty. All right. How do you choose which recipes, restaurants, or foods to write about?
I love writing food reviews. I write for one of the magazines in town is Inside Bella Vista, but it goes out all over Northwest Arkansas. So I'm the food editor for that magazine. I get to do these little things called restaurant road trips. I've also written for Leisure List, which is an online kind of social media platform where I was kind of traveling around Arkansas to write about food. Whenever I think about good food, I always tell people this, like on culinary tours, we're not going to only go to a white tablecloth with waiters. I mean, we might go to a few places like that, but we're also going to go to maybe food trucks or places with a paper plate and a plastic fork. I don't care what it's served on. I don't really even care where it comes from. I just want good food. So how I decide, I look for full parking lots and restaurants for one, if I'm going to a new place. A lot of times when I'm traveling, I'll go on TripAdvisor and read reviews. Or I'll just ask locals, where would you eat? When I go to a restaurant, I hardly ever order right off the menu. I'm always asking the waiter, what would you eat if you're on break right now? What's the best thing in the kitchen? I care more about what's the best thing that a place has to offer and what's their characteristic food than what's the hype or trendy place to go. I look for the places that actually seem to have the locals. And so when I'm looking at cars in the parking lot, if I'm in Texas, I'm looking for Texas plates. You know, if I'm traveling in another country, I'm looking for menus that aren't written in English. I mean, I'm looking for whatever is characteristic of that area. So I'm probably not going to have seafood in West Memphis, but you know, but I'll definitely have some good barbecue. And I'm going to look for that rundown shack, and I'm going to like smell the air and make sure I can smell a smoker that's been running for 6 or 9 hours, you know? So I'm looking for those like characteristics of the food that are resonant with like people that are visiting, who's there. It doesn't matter if it's fancy or not. I don't always think that a fancy place actually serves the best food. I look for just, word of mouth. Is a big thing. That's how you figure out if you're in a small town, where to go.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to write about, because I think that's what people want to see and they want to taste. We don't need another Applebee's, no offense to chain restaurants, but we want to go to the local places that other people love. But when you're new to a place, yeah, it's kind of daunting to figure out where to go. Certainly in Bentonville and Northwest Arkansas, that's booming and growing. We have so many culinary, like kind of creators and masters around. It's hard to know which restaurant to go to. To me, I think Northwest Arkansas is one big mixing bowl of cultures and people. I don't think of them as like individual towns. So I don't mind driving 30 minutes to an hour for a good meal in Fayetteville or Rogers or downtown Springdale, if that's where it's at. So I'll go to a taqueria there, and I'll go to the Indian restaurant like Kana Grill in Fayetteville because they have a full parking lot and it looks like a fantastic place to stop by. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, okay. So was the question about cookbooks, or I know we got a little off here. How do we choose what we write about?
Yeah, recipes, restaurants, or foods.
Well, when it comes to restaurants, a lot of it is the tips I get from other people, restaurants that come up in conversations. But literally a lot of the times I end up stopping at a restaurant and writing about them because I go by and I smell it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to go and get that right now. When it comes to writing cookbooks, it's a bit harder. I'm not a traditional cookbook writer. Up until this last year, this was my only book that could be considered a cookbook, Arkansas Food. And this took 12 years of going all over the state and finding different places that had different foods and going to the festivals and going out to the farms. And so it's not really a cookbook, it's a lot of tradition. But I really did dive into cookbook writing during the pandemic because it wasn't safe to go into our restaurants, and most of our restaurants were closed. They had limited capacity. What I ended up coming up with, and I know this is a plug, but this is about a bar. These are my food stories. And the way that I came up with it was, what do I eat? While we were going through the pandemic, we potted up hard. We had a 4-person pot of my mother, my partner, my daughter, and myself. And I just started cooking. I hadn't cooked much in the previous decade because I was constantly out at restaurants. But I started off with the old church cookbook recipes, and then just the recipes that I remembered from my entire life. And so I talk about the way that we fried bologna, or how we would have Vienna sausages with cheese on crackers with Miracle Whip. As terrible as that sounds, that was part of growing up. Or the way we would fry black apples and serve them alongside meals at breakfast. Or the particular way I did fried chicken, or old-fashioned chocolate fried pies. This was all very much what I grew up eating. It was a chance to sit down and write these recipes out. It's hard to select down. Right now, I'm also editing a church and community cookbook collection, and trying to decide specifically which recipes to include has been very hard, because how do you represent a state's worth of people who lived from the 50s to the 90s in all different regions of the state with different foodstuffs available to them? It's tough. But at some point or another, you have to sit down and put on the editor cap and be brutal about it and cut it all down.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Since I write a food column every week, I look for inspiration everywhere because sometimes I feel like I've written about everything, but then there's other times that, I feel like I could write about anything because food touches everything. So I write about, like one time I had a watermelon sitting on my counter for too long. And what happens is, that maybe like a little crack might happen. You might be like, why is there a little crack in my watermelon? And then you crack it open and it like explodes because it's been sitting for so long. Fermented, things like that. So like I am looking for inspiration all the time, and it's everywhere because food it touches everything. And so
It does.
I like to relate it to an experience, tell a story about it. And I also love a road trip that involves, that always involves food. But yeah, a road trip is a really good place for inspiration because of all the unexpected roadside food. I love it. Yeah, and then, yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on about that.
Yeah, my mom and I like to do a lot of road trips, and the first thing we ever look for is what food are we going to eat. So yeah. That's our main focal point. All right. What does your research or writing process look like?
So that's like such a fun question, right? You got this one, Kat, or you want me to start?
I can start off because mine's unusual. I say that everybody's got a different way. It's a moment of inspiration. Sometimes it's a moment of necessitation. Necessity is the mother of invention. Our thing around the house say is necessity is a mother, and that mother needs feeding. She's got a thing to do. Sometimes it comes from inspiration. Sometimes it comes from desperation. I'm currently working on a book about dairy bars in the state of Arkansas, and it literally came to me. I was making a book delivery in Hot Springs, and on the way back, my partner and I dropped by Mel's Drive-In in Malvern, which I remembered from being a kid, and it's still there. And I'm ordering through this window with the plexiglass and everything, and I suddenly hit me. It's like, I could be writing about these folks because they have the perfect business model for the pandemic. And the next morning I woke up and I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get on the road and do this. And I mentioned this to my partner. He goes, this is exactly the thing you need to do. Yesterday, I photographed my 64th out of 94 dairy bars in the state of Arkansas. And I've got 6 more that I will do today. And I just roll with it. I'm blessed with the fact that necessity caused me to start my own press here a few years ago when I needed to create that book for Make Room for Pie. When I have a book idea, I just roll with it. And self-publishing has changed a lot that way. We are blessed to have this component that if we want to get something out there and we're willing to do the work and put it in there, our voices can still be heard by going that route. So the short answer, the too long didn't read, inspiration, perspiration, get it done.
Absolutely. So when I think writing magazine articles and like news pieces, like smaller bits, is different than writing a book. So there's 2 different types of food writing that I do. I guess with the book, I was a little surprised at what my process would be. To be honest, I hadn't really written a book before. I'd always wanted to. So that was my first book, the Ozark Culinary History. And I realized really quick that I am a super duper nerd and I love research so much that I will not stop. And I had to be told by a friend, Erin, the book is due in 12 days. You have to start writing now. You have to stop researching, because I was having so much fun with the research. I would, end up interviewing one person, like just starting out with one person that knew how to make great fried pies, for example, and then would ask them, now, who do I need to talk to next? And they would tell me a person, give me their phone number, foster an introduction. And I would show up at that person's house, drink sweet tea and moonshine with them and get the story on how they made it and that kind of thing. So that's how the book process, the writing process worked for me, to research it, to like dig like a reporter into the dirt and just really get the deep roots of the Ozark story. Now, when I got home and started writing it, I had all these notes that I'd saved under different chapter headings in my computer, right? But what I noticed was I had done about 3 times the amount of research I really needed to do for the word count in the book page, right? So, Kat, you're nodding and you agree.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh, girl, it was so crazy because the old idea of copy paste like on your computer. Well, I couldn't do that. I had to print out all the notes and literally cut them into pieces, lay them out on the paper all the way across the kitchen floor and all the counters, and start taking out tearfully. I was literally crying 3/4 of my research out of each chapter, removing the volume so that way I could see what I wanted to do. And then I started piecing together and filling in the gaps because I had quotes and recipes and stories. But that's how I had to do it, which I don't think is very conventional, but I just discovered that was my way because I didn't know any other way to do it. Once I got going, I was like, oh my goodness. So I have enough research to do 3 more food books. It's just sitting in a file folder. With magazine articles, I know how to kind of like put together a food review and I can do that pretty promptly. But with a book, it was a bit of a daunting task. I just thought, man, well, I'm just going to keep researching. And so I wrote the book in 12 days. And it's not a 300 pager, but it's about 200 pages, but I did write it in 12 days.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I could definitely relate to that method, I will say, because I could definitely find myself falling down the rabbit hole, the internet research rabbit hole, all the time. I love it. I love learning more and more and more, and then interviewing people, and I love it. And so then coming down to the writing is often like a procrastination issue, and then you just have to do it, Yeah. And so piecing it all together, and I completely relate to that method. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I have to admit here, I have a very different method for that. I'm a writer, and that's apparently that's unusual for someone who's an author. The way that I write is on the way home from someplace, I'm telling myself the story out loud. I'm the person that's talking in the car that, next to you at the stoplight, you're going, what the heck are they doing? And when I get home, I write the story. And the only editing that I will do when I put it into the book is to bring it down a little bit so it fits into the page I need it to fit into. When I have those days where I have to cut a lot, I usually write my conversation, put the small bit in the book, and then I throw up the full story on Tie-Dye Travels, my website, or I may send it to an editor that I know around the state and say, hey, this might fit in with you. I probably do way more free work than I need to be doing. But editing can be very hard. It's one of the reasons I have those conversations with my own self or with my partner when he's traveling with me, so that I can recite the story and I can type the story and it's just out there. And that comes probably from television, because I used to go in at midnight every night, and by 4 o'clock I had to have enough content that made sense and was grammatically correct for 3 anchors for a 5 to 7 a.m. morning show. So I had a very different life, but it really helped me with this one.
Yep, exactly.
For sure. Do you have any advice for anyone wanting to start a career in food writing?
I'll let someone else take it first.
Who's going first?
Right.
Sorry, there was a little bit of a delay on my camera. I'm sorry.
Okay, good. That's sort of a big question because I know there's so much. So
I'll go. I would. I mean, for someone that wants to get started in food writing, I would say definitely practice writing. Write every day. Write letters. Write in a journal. Just write and write with your voice. That's what is authentic to me. You can always, I feel like you can tell when a writer is writing with their voice versus the way, I don't know, maybe they think people want to read. But I think if you really care about what you're writing about, it's going to come through if you write with your voice, and to just practice, just write all the time, every day. That's what I would say.
That's really great advice.
I think like for me, like food writing is a hard gig to get into, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to do it, especially with food and chefs kind of being like a big there's kind of a big, almost a celebrity element to it now. And so I think, to be honest, like offering to do some work for free is a good way to get started. Maybe you have a small local magazine or a small local paper and you offer, you send in little articles to the editor. You've got to start somewhere, but you've got to get the ball rolling. Once you get a few things going and you're credible as a food writer, then people will start offering you paid work. But I think it's kind of hard to get going. You could always try to like do it in a weird way like I did and start out with like magazines and go to a book. But most people want to start out with magazines or something small and work their way up. So I think that, yeah, like what Amanda said, like writing every day. And one of the things I remember as a writer was like trying to make sure that if I'm going to be writing and I consider myself a writer, I'm going to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. Whether I'm out on the road like Kat is, like getting the story, or in my office doing the work, whatever I'm doing, I need to delegate that time aside, because it's really easy to get distracted and to get off track with writing because nobody's here making sure you're doing it, So I think that's part also is like the discipline of consistently writing. Yeah.
For sure.
It is, I joke, it's important to be independently wealthy before you begin. Because when you start out with this, unless you are fortunate enough to fall into it with the career that you're doing right now, you can be devastatingly poor.
Yes.
I went through that. I was fortunate enough to have a windfall right at the beginning of my career, but then I got pregnant. We finally were able to have a baby, and that really, I had to eat a lot of humble pie. I ended up going on state Medicaid just so that, because we had nothing, because I had jumped from a career where I was making enough to pay for everything that we needed to getting initially about $50 a story. In fact, when I took over Eat Arkansas, I worked for the delicious sum of $125 a month. I don't leave the house for less than $200 on a story now, but it took a very, very long time to get there. I'm in my 14th year of doing this now. So if you are interested in food writing as a career, get all the samples you can together, write. Anytime you have a meal, write. Get your phone out, take pictures of it so you have something to refer to. Take a copy of the menu. Write things on napkins and take them home and transcribe them. Anything that you can do to find the experience that you just had and be able to share it as best as you can with your words. Be diligent. Be disciplined. You have to be disciplined, and have something else to fall back on whenever times are crazy, because we certainly have just gone through really, really crazy times.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, both of you talked about discipline, and that's a huge one. I have to agree with both of you. That's a tough one. There are times that you don't want to write, you don't feel like it. It's your job. You have to push through that, and that's part of the discipline of it. Yeah, I fully agree with you.
I know we're getting close to time. We do have one more question, and I think this is such an awesome question, and you really, one of my favorites. So I want to ask that really quick. What is your favorite meal, recipe, or restaurant from the Ozark region, or just from the Arkansas region? Which that's another huge question. For me, it depends on the day of the week, which is my favorite. So
yeah,
I'd have to go with beans, greens, and cornbread from Mockingbird Kitchen in Fayetteville. Those ladies just take the food of the Ozarks and they put it together in new ways with like a sour vinaigrette. It's so good. It's got like cornbread croutons. It's got black-eyed peas. I'm pretty sure like purple whole peas are in there too sometimes. It's just whatever's like growing local. I love it. Having beans and cornbread is kind of where it's at for me. And they do a nice modern take on it that feels kind of gourmet.
Sure. Chef Chrissy, she's amazing. She's awesome.
She really, really is.
Yes.
This is tough. I usually don't mention my favorite restaurant or favorite because it's not fair. But if I were to have a meal right now, it would be at the Montenay Inn Chicken Restaurant, the family style meal. I'll ask for a bowl of thighs and, you know, the mashed potatoes and gravy and that fresh bread with the apple butter. Oh, I want some apple butter right now. Oh my goodness. So that's my favorite. This moment, it'll change by the end of the day. It always does.
And that bean soup they have there is one of my favorites too.
I tried to get that from David and he wouldn't even tell me what kind of beans he had in it. And I was interviewing the book. That boy is tight-lipped.
Yeah. So good. All right. What about you, Amanda?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I have not been to a restaurant in Arkansas in over a year. So I'm a little out of touch, you know. It's very sad. But I would say there's definitely something with a homegrown tomato and a homegrown cucumber in the heat of the summer would be perfection.
Nothing beats that.
Oh yeah.
So good.
That's what I've got for now. I can't decide.
Oh yeah.
I'm ready for those tomatoes.
Me too.
Yeah.
Little
Awesome.
salt on them, good to go.
Oh yeah, like standing over the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You don't get it all over yourself.
Yes.
Yep.
On a burger, a backyard grilled burger.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. I'm getting hungrier by the second here.
Lunchtime.
We don't have any questions from the panelists, or not from the panelists, from those watching, but I have a question.
Okay.
I know you guys kind of touched a little bit on like what you're working on, but are there things that you're working on now that people might be on the lookout for, or how can people look at things that you are working on, like your website or something like that?
So the food tours are going to pick back up now that we're about to launch into April and tourism season, and now with the COVID guidelines lifting. So I'd love for people to come on an Ozark Culinary tour with me of downtown Bentonville, 8th Street Market, or downtown Rogers. They can sign up by going on the website, which is ozarkculinarytours.com, or they can contact me directly through like Facebook or Instagram. I'm all of those pages are available, and there's a phone number on there as well. But I can set up like private food tours. So that's what I'll be doing. I'm really excited to go back into the restaurants again, finally, after all of this COVID mess. And we will start being able to just go back to normal and enjoy the great restaurants that we have to offer in Northwest Arkansas. And so that's pretty much what I have coming down the pike. And I'm the guide. I'll talk to you about the arts, history, culture. In 2.5 hours, we'll go to 5 different restaurants and everything will be paired and logistically coordinated by myself. So you won't have to worry about a thing or ever have to pull out your wallet, but you end up having at least an alcoholic beverage or a coffee, 3 savory food stops, and 1 sweet food stop to finish. Yeah.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah,
It's fun. You should come with me, Kat. You'll probably know everybody that we go to.
I'm almost there. I'm almost there. I've already had my first shot. I'm so excited about getting a second. I have not eaten in a restaurant since March 11th of last year. So these dairy bars, you know, it's all ordering through the window, but I want to sit down and actually experience restaurants again. Right now, what I'm doing that you can follow on my social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, is I'm sharing out the dairy bars I'm going to, and in the order I'm going to, I think right now I'm up to number 37 or 38 on the Facebook. I'm about 4 behind on the Twitter. I've got to catch them up. Arkansas Dairy Bars, Neat Eats and Cool Treats will be premiering. I can't believe it'll be this soon. The first or second week of June on Arkansas PBS. Be looking for the listings. The book that comes along with it will be available through Arkansas PBS in June and will be available to the general public for ordering in August. And then the Arkansas Church and Cookbook, Church and Community Cookbook Volume 1 should be out the middle of December.
Well, way to go, Kat. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just too much stuff.
Well, I write every week for the Joplin Globe, the newspaper. So you can find my column online, joplinglobe.com. And there's also a link to the magazine where I write a little bit of everything in there, but there is a taste section where I usually write about a restaurant, a local restaurant. So yeah, joplinglobe.com every week.
I love it.
That's all.
All right. Well, I'm so glad that we had this time this morning. This was so much fun. I'm so hungry. So I'm definitely about to do some shopping here at the store and go home and make a whole bunch of food.
Oh, nice.
Excellent.
That sounds great, Heather. I know you're a great cook, so I'm sorry I'm
Well,
gonna miss
thank
it.
you. Right.
Thank you guys so much for joining
Thank
us
you very
and
much.
talking to us this rainy morning. So yeah, thank you. This
for
was really
having me.
wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Nice to meet
It
you
was.
guys.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to meet you all, and thanks for putting all of this together.
Yes.
Our pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.